I stepped into the living room and froze when Emily's speakerphone blared, "Josh is too soft." Before I dive into what happened next, drop a comment, soft, if you've ever been underestimated, and hit subscribe if you know respect is non-negotiable. That phrase hit me like a slap. It wasn't the first time someone questioned if I was man enough, but hearing it from the woman I'd spent 4 years building a life with, who I thought admired my gentleness, was something else entirely. The house smelled like warm garlic and tomatoes. I'd left the marinara simmering on low, bread crisping in the oven, the table already set. Just 2 plates, folded linen napkins, a candle I knew she liked, cedarwood and sage. It had been a long week for both of us, and I wanted to do something small but comforting. That was how I loved quiet acts of care. The late spring light poured in golden through the dining room window. Outside, the neighbors' wind chimes danced in a soft breeze. It should have been a peaceful evening. But there I stood, invisible in my own home. Emily didn't know I was back early. I'd left the garage door open when I pulled in, and instead of calling out like I usually did, I walked through the side hallway hoping to surprise her. That's when I heard her. "She means well," Emily continued, her voice tight like she was holding something back. "But seriously, Lisa, I always have to be the one to make a decision. He checks in with me about everything. It's like he wants me to approve every move. Sometimes I just want him to take control." Lisa snorted in the background. "Like Caleb did," Emily laughed. "Exactly. Caleb was a jerk, but at least he had a spine." I leaned against the wall, my palms suddenly cold. Caleb. Her ex. The guy who cheated on her and disappeared for 3 days at a time. The guy she'd cried to me about for months after we first met. And now what she missed, that chaos, my throat burned. I backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound, and slipped into the garage. The door closed behind me with a soft click. I stood there in the quiet, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects. The bookshelf I promised I'd stain before the wedding leaned against the wall, still unfinished. A single screw lay on the floor. I picked it up and rolled it between my fingers like it could ground me. The garage had always been my space. My one corner of the world where things made sense. You put in work, things came together. It was simple, direct. Nothing like love. I let the screw fall back into the drawer and stared at my reflection in the dark window. "Too soft." The words echoed again. And for the first time, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt stupid. I stood there for what felt like minutes, maybe more. The garage smelled like cedar, sawdust, and old ambition. That bookshelf had been sitting in the same spot since February. I kept meaning to finish it. Just like I kept meaning to ask Emily how she was really feeling, or ask myself the same thing. But life kept moving, didn't it? Work deadlines. Grocery runs. Dinner at her parents' once a month. Little moments piled up. And I kept smoothing everything over, hoping that would be enough. I turned and reached for the wrench lying on my bench. It still had grease from the last car fix I did. Heavy. Familiar. I wrapped my hand around it and closed my fingers tight. That weight. It reminded me of when I was a kid trying to hold everything together after my dad walked out. I learned early that if I wanted people to stay, I had to be useful, be easy, be good. But now I wondered what good that had done me. Emily was in there comparing me to her toxic ex and laughing. I stared at the wrench. Not because I needed to fix anything, but because I suddenly realized I might have broken something inside myself. By always yielding. Always deferring. Always folding my opinions like laundry neatly and out of the way. I heard her voice again, muffled now, still on the phone. Still talking to Lisa. Maybe about the wedding. Maybe about how lucky she was to have someone so reliable. Reliable enough to build a life with, but not strong enough to respect. The garage light flickered. Outside, the breeze had picked up. Leaves whispered against the siding. The scent of toasted bread drifted through the vent. Dinner was ready. But I wasn't sure I was. I opened the drawer again and set the wrench back in place. Then I stepped toward the door leading into the kitchen. My legs felt like they weren't mine. My heart beat harder now, like it had caught up to something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't just about the phone call. This was about every quiet moment I'd swallowed frustration. Every time I said, "Whatever you want, babe." Every dinner I cooked even when I was exhausted. Every time I smiled while she picked the movie, the restaurant, the vacation. And tonight, she had laughed about it. I pressed my hand flat against the door frame. My fingertips tingled. Then, a sound. The front door clicked open. Emily was back in the entryway. Shoes off. Probably walking toward the kitchen. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Would I walk in there and pretend I hadn't heard? Would I serve her pasta and let her complain about her coworkers while I nodded along? Or let me know in the comments, would you confront her or walk away? The house had gone quiet. I could hear the soft shuffle of her steps across the hardwood, then the familiar creak of the fridge opening. The clink of a water glass. Normal sounds, small domestic things, but tonight they pressed against me like weight. I stood still. Inside the garage, I felt more like myself than I had in weeks. Maybe months. My mind raced back to the beginning, to when we first started dating. Emily said I was a breath of fresh air. She liked how I listened. How I made her coffee just the way she liked it. How I remembered her mom's birthday before she did. Back then, she called me thoughtful. Now I was too soft. What had changed? Had I changed? Or had she just stopped pretending to admire the things I gave freely? The garage door handle turned gently beneath my fingers. I could walk back and serve dinner, say nothing. Let the night roll on. Let the memory of her words get buried under small talk and streaming shows. But I couldn't do that. Not anymore. I took one last breath, deep, steady, then slowly opened the door. The kitchen light glowed warm against the dusk. Emily stood at the island, sipping her water. She wore the soft sweater I bought her last fall. Her hair was up a loose bun like she always did when she got home. She looked up, startled. "Oh, hey, babe. I didn't hear you come in." Her smile was automatic. Practiced. "I got home early," I said quietly. My voice felt like gravel in my throat. I moved past her, picked up the garlic bread from the oven, placed it on the table next to the pasta. She watched me for a moment, then turned toward the sink. "I was just telling Lisa we've got to get serious about the seating chart. Her cousin canceled, so that opens a spot." I didn't respond. I poured myself a glass of water. Set it down beside the plate I'd already laid out. Then I looked up and met her eyes. Something flickered there, confusion maybe. Or just surprise that I hadn't smiled. Hadn't asked about her day. "You okay?" she asked. Her voice softened. She walked over, leaned lightly against the counter. "You're quiet." I nodded. "Yeah." It was the only word I had. She waited. But I didn't give her anything else. Not tonight. The silence stretched. Not hostile, just honest. She shifted her weight, glanced at the table, then back at me. "You cooked," she said gently. "I always do," I replied. That landed. She blinked. Then looked away. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip. In the stillness, I could hear the wind brushing against the siding outside. The candle flickered, casting uneven light on the table. Emily opened her mouth to speak again, but just then Scout barked once from the front door. He always barked when the neighborhood cat passed by. It broke the moment. Emily set her glass down, cleared her throat. "I'll get the plates," she murmured. I didn't stop her. Didn't say another word. But as I sat down, I knew this wasn't over. This dinner, this house, this quiet, none of it could cover what I'd heard. And I wasn't sure I could ever unhear it. Breakfast used to be my quiet ritual. Today, I left Emily's mug untouched. If you've ever set a boundary that shocked someone, type boundary below. The smell of coffee always helped me feel steady in the morning. Something about the soft drip of the machine, the rising warmth in the kitchen. It gave me space to collect myself. Even before Scout's tail thumped against the cabinets or Emily's footsteps echoed down the stairs, I had those 10 minutes of peace. But not this morning. This morning felt different. Scout watched me with quiet eyes as I measured the grounds. He tilted his head when I opened just one cabinet. His ears perked slightly when I set down just one mug. I didn't say anything out loud, but I think he knew. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual. Outside, the neighbor's sprinklers kicked on with a soft hiss. Steam curled from my mug and I stood still, hands wrapped around it, letting the silence stretch. The second mug, the one I usually warmed for Emily, stayed in its place. That small decision felt huge. I took my first sip and it tasted sharper somehow. Like the coffee knew something had changed too. Scout gave a low whine, then padded over to his spot near the window. Sunlight spilled across the tile, but I didn't feel warm. I leaned against the counter and waited. For what, I wasn't sure. Her footsteps, maybe. The moment I'd start second-guessing myself. Or just the quiet confirmation that this time I wouldn't fold. From upstairs, I heard the bathroom door close. Then, open again. Drawers. A brush dropped into the sink. Then, the stairs creaked. Scout looked up before I did. His tail thumped once, but even he didn't move. And then Emily walked in. Hair still damp, robe tied loose, eyes already on her phone. She paused halfway to the fridge, froze really. Her gaze swept the counter. Then back to me. Her brow furrowed just slightly. "Where's mine?" Her voice wasn't sharp, but it wasn't soft either. I looked at her. Really looked at her. She looked like she always did on weekday mornings, a little tired, half present, like someone still winding up for the day. I raised my mug slightly. "I didn't know when you'd be down." Her eyes narrowed, but just a little. She opened the cabinet, pulled out her own mug, slammed it down, not hard, but not gentle either. Then she poured her own coffee. Scout didn't move. Neither did I. And in that stillness, something between us shifted, small but unmistakable. She added sugar, then cream, stirring harder than necessary. The spoon clinked against the mug with a kind of rhythm, not angry exactly, but pointed. I didn't say anything, just stood there, letting the silence do its work. Emily finally took a sip and leaned against the island. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her glancing, measuring, waiting for me to soften. I didn't. "Rough night?" she asked, casual, like nothing had happened. I sipped my coffee again. It was long. Another pause. "Dinner was good, by the way." She looked over, testing the waters. "I meant to say that last night." I gave her a nod. "Glad you liked it." She hesitated. That wasn't the response she expected. Usually that would have opened the door to some inside joke or a smile. But not today. Today I wasn't in the mood to make things easier. Not when the person across from me had compared me to the guy who once ghosted her for a week. Not when I'd spent the whole night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing her voice in my head. Too soft. Too agreeable. I wasn't angry exactly. Just done pretending it didn't sting. She crossed her arms. "You're quiet." I shrugged. "I've been thinking." Emily tilted her head. About what? Scout stretched near the doorway, yawned, and settled into his usual morning nap spot. The only creature in the house who still knew peace. I glanced out the window. Clouds were pulling across the sky, slow and gray, but not threatening. Just a little tired looking. "About balance," I said. "In this relationship." That landed. She blinked just once. Then lowered her mug a little. "Balance," she echoed. I didn't fill in the silence. Let her sit in it for a moment. She stared at me as if trying to decide what kind of conversation we were about to have. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the hallway. Halfway there, she paused. "You could have just said something instead of whatever this is." "I'm saying it now," I replied. She didn't look back. Just kept walking. A minute later, I heard the bedroom door close. I finished my coffee in 3 slow sips. Scout lifted his head slightly, then dropped it again, satisfied that all was calm, at least for now. But it wasn't. Not really. Calm isn't the same thing as peace. I rinsed my mug in the sink, wiped the counter, and grabbed my bag off the chair. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly. The hydrangeas Emily planted in the front garden nodded in the breeze. I opened the door, stepped out, and didn't look back. The sound of the car door slamming behind me felt louder than usual. Final. The driver's seat felt colder than I expected. Even with the late spring sun warming the windshield, there was a chill that settled deep in my chest. I adjusted the rearview mirror, caught a glimpse of myself. Eyes tired, jaw tight, not angry, not sad, just hollow. Scout stood at the window watching me. His ears were up, tail low, eyes steady. Like he knew something in me had shifted and there was no going back. I started the engine. The soft hum filled the silence like a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I didn't have a real plan, no meeting, no errand, no urgent task. I just needed to be somewhere else. The driveway gravel crunched beneath the tires as I backed out. The house faded behind me, one window at a time. Mint green trim, white curtains, all still, all quiet. But inside those walls a storm waited. I turned onto the main road heading east without thinking. The city slowly came to life. Joggers, delivery vans, a couple walking a toddler in a red wagon. Ordinary things. But they felt like a different world than the one I just stepped out of. My phone buzzed once in the cup holder. I didn't check, didn't need to. It was probably Emily. I knew the pattern by now. She'd sit in the silence for 10, maybe 15 minutes. Then send a neutral message. Where are you? Are you okay? We should talk later. I used to answer right away. Used to feel like I owed her that response. Like being present always immediately was part of being a good man. But today I just drove. A red light stopped me at Burnside and 12th. I looked around at the murals, the cafe across the street already half full. Someone laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Unfiltered. I missed that. Not the cafe. Not the street. But the feeling. Of being allowed to exist without performing. Of being heard without having to raise my voice. The light turned green. I didn't move right away. The car behind me didn't honk. No pressure. Just space. I finally eased forward. And for the first time in a long while I felt like I was driving somewhere that mattered, even if I didn't know where it was yet. Smash that like button if you think sometimes silence speaks louder than words. At her bridal shower, every time I spoke, Emily cut me off and her friends laughed. I'd planned this day for months. Now it felt like a public reveal of my own shame. It was a Saturday in late May. Sunlight filtered through the white pop-up canopy set up in Lisa's backyard. Soft pastel balloons bobbed in the breeze. A long folding table displayed tiered trays of lemon bars and deviled eggs. Pitchers of pink lemonade sat on both ends, sweating in the spring heat. Emily wore a pale peach dress that matched the color scheme, her hair pulled up with small clips that sparkled when she turned. She looked like the centerpiece. Everyone was looking at her. Everyone always did. I stood near the drink station, clutching the custom photo album I had made. 12 weeks, 32 photos, a few clumsy captions I'd typed myself, each one a moment I thought had mattered. Moments we had shared. Scout pawing at our new welcome mat. Emily laughing in the kitchen with flour on her nose. The two of us sitting on the floor surrounded by paint cans, arguing over eggshell versus cloud. I'd stayed up late last week selecting the photos. Ordering it just in time. Tracking the delivery, checking for smudges. I brought it today as a surprise. Something meaningful. Something quiet but full. Everyone I called out, raising my hand a little. A few heads turned. Tyler looked up from a plate of sliders. I just wanted to say a few words, I said. My voice shook a little, but only because I cared. Emily appeared beside me with a practiced smile. Oh, he's about to make it sentimental, she teased. A few bridesmaids chuckled. I smiled tightly, holding up the album. I put this together for you, I told her. Just memories. Stuff I didn't want us to forget. Lisa leaned closer to her husband and whispered just loud enough. He's sweet but too soft, right? I saw her glance at Emily, who gave the tiniest shrug. A smile tugged at the edge of her lips. I stood there holding the album between us like some fragile offering. Emily took it but didn't open it. "Thanks, babe," she said loud and fast. Then turned to Lisa. "You remember that trip to Hood River, that one hike?" Lisa burst into laughter. "Where we had to carry Chelsea back because she wore wedges." "Exactly," Emily laughed. "She's not even here yet, and I'm still mad about it." The attention shifted. Laughter spread like ripples. I stood there still holding the second copy I had made, the one I thought she might want for her parents. But no one was looking anymore. The moment had passed. Only Tyler held my gaze. He didn't smile, he just watched. I lowered the extra album. Tried not to let it show. But my fingers tightened around the spine. The laughter swirled around me, carefree, easy, the kind of joy that shouldn't sting, and yet, it did. I walked to the drink table, poured lemonade into a paper cup. The ice crackled. The sweetness hit my throat a little too sharp. Lisa brushed past me, still giggling, then circled back and leaned in close. "You know I was just teasing, right?" she said, sing-song. "You're good for Em. She needs someone stable." I nodded. Didn't say thank you. Didn't say anything. She lingered as if waiting for me to reassure her to be soft again, but I didn't give her that out. Instead, I turned. I scanned the backyard. Past the photo booth, past the mason jars full of tulips. Until my eyes landed on Tyler alone at the edge of the lawn sipping a beer. I walked over slow, careful. He looked up as I approached, raised his brow. Didn't speak first. "I know what your wife said," I told him, voice even. I heard it. He didn't flinch. Just took a drink. Then nodded. "She talks too much when she's on a high," he replied. "She thinks she's funny. Most of the time she's not." There was no sarcasm in his voice. No apology either. Just honesty, sharp and plain. I appreciated it more than I expected. "People don't know what to do with quiet men," Tyler added. "They mistake kindness for weakness." I studied his face. The edges of it seemed older than I remembered. More worn in. Like he'd seen this all before. "I've been quiet a long time," I said. "Maybe too long." He glanced toward the group again, then back at me. "What are you going to do about it?" My hands were still. My throat calm. It surprised me. I took a breath. And turned back toward the crowd. The same moment, someone clinked a fork against a glass. "Let's toast to Emily," a voice called. Another laugh. The ripple effect again. I stepped forward. This time louder. "Actually, can I say something first?" They turned. One by one. Even Emily. Still holding the album. Still not looking inside. I walked to the center of the group. No microphone, just my voice. And this time, I didn't let it tremble. "I know I don't talk much," I began, and a few of them chuckled softly like I'd made a self-deprecating joke. But I didn't smile. I let the silence after that line sit. Just long enough. "I work with numbers," I said. "Code, logic, frameworks. Things that don't laugh behind your back." Emily's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Still polite, still bridal. But I felt the shift. "I made something for today," I continued, and I lifted the album again, holding it steady. "Not just this." I tapped the leather cover lightly. I made space. I gave room. Every time someone interrupted me, I let it slide. Every time someone laughed at what I brought to the table, I convinced myself they didn't mean harm. A breeze tugged at the streamers. Scout barked faintly in the house behind us. But here's what I finally understood. I turned slowly toward Tyler. "This isn't about being soft. It's about whether the people around you think softness deserves respect." Tyler nodded once. And then, without a hint of irony, he raised his glass. "To Josh," he said. For finally finding his voice. The clinks came slowly, unsure at first, then fuller, a ripple of surprised applause. I met Emily's eyes. Her smile was tight now. Like porcelain trying not to crack. She looked down at the album finally. But didn't open it. Then she turned to Lisa, mouth moving, laughter absent. That was when I knew something between us had shifted. Maybe for good, maybe not. But it had shifted. Behind me, the kids squealed by the lemonade stand. Plastic cups toppled. Someone turned on a speaker with low jazz. And somewhere in that sunny backyard, I felt the weight of every unsaid thing begin to lift. Just as I turned to step away, I caught the smallest sound. Emily whispering to Lisa, "I don't like this version of him." Her voice didn't rise, but the words cut clean. I kept walking. Not because I didn't hear her, but because I finally didn't need to answer. I watched the planner flip through our folder, then her eyes locked on the red cancel stamp. It bled across the page like something final. The room held its breath. Her fingers paused mid-turn, hovering over the vendor spreadsheet I had highlighted in yellow, each line item annotated, each invoice printed clean. Outside the wide glass windows, Portland shimmered in late July haze. Inside, the chill of air conditioning made my palms feel dry. "Mr. Miller," she said softly. Her voice didn't match the marble table or the curated calm of the space. It was unsure. Caught off guard. I wasn't informed there was a cancellation. "Miss Nguyen added, glancing at her assistant. The girl, barely 20, in black slacks and ballet flats, froze beside the coffee tray. Not even the sugar cubes clinked. Emily sat beside me, legs crossed, fingernails painted the same blush color as the wedding invites we had once approved together. She hadn't touched the water bottle on the armrest. Her mother, Carol, sat opposite posture, rigid necklace of white pearls clutched between her fingers like a rosary. I cleared my throat, slid the folder closer to Miss Nguyen. "There's a cancellation clause on page 9, I said. "Every vendor confirmed. No one will lose money. No one but me." The word settled. Waited. Unapologetic. Emily turned toward me, but I didn't look back. Not yet. Months ago I would have explained. Softened the blow. Apologized for the mess. Taken on the shame like it belonged to me. But not now. The folder had every receipt. Every contract. Every email confirmation. All retracted. All time-stamped. All final. Miss Nguyen cleared her throat again. She touched the red stamp lightly, like it might smear. Then looked back up. "Would you like to discuss alternatives?" I shook my head once. Firm. Emily finally spoke. "You canceled everything without me." Her voice cracked on the last word, like it hadn't decided if it was angry or afraid. Carol leaned forward, pearls clicking. "This isn't how adults behave, Joshua. There are families involved. Guests. A registry, I know," I said, calmly, evenly. And I looked her straight in the eye. Which is why I didn't wait until it got worse. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. The hum of the office grew louder. Now the ceiling vents a printer in another room, the faint traffic from 3 stories down. Everything normal, except us. Emily's chair creaked. Not loudly, but enough to pull every eye in the room back to her. She shifted in it like the fabric had turned hostile. Like the leather didn't recognize her anymore. "Is this because of Lisa?" Her voice didn't carry emotion. Only calculation. Number. I looked at her for the first time. "It's because of me." That stopped her. I could see the wheels turning. She wasn't used to being shut out. "You're overreacting," Carol snapped. "We're a month from the ceremony. Everything's been paid. The venue, the orchestra. All of it," I said. "Handled." I reached into my coat pocket. Pulled out the second folder, slimmer, crisp. Laid it next to the canceled one. Vendor releases. Account summaries. Proof of reimbursement to every party who needed it. Miss Nguyen opened it delicately, like it might hum with static. The assistant, silent all this time, finally blinked. She looked at me, really looked. Not with pity, not with judgment, just clarity. "I've been managing other people's comfort," I said. "For 3 years straight. And every time I put something down to make room, no one noticed I was emptying myself." Emily's lips parted. But I didn't pause. I said yes to colors I hated. Chose menus I wouldn't eat. Laughed at jokes that chipped away at me. Because I thought it was love. Because I thought love meant never making someone uncomfortable. Carol let out a scoff. "That tight, sharp kind. So you're canceling your future because of a few details?" I turned fully to face her now. The room felt like it had narrowed. Not in size, but in focus. I'm canceling a wedding, I said, not a life. And then I looked at Emily. The woman I thought I'd known. The woman who thought my silence meant consent. You knew who I was when we met, I said. But I don't think you ever liked that version. You liked how easy I made your life look. Her eyes shone. Not from tears. From the kind of rage that comes when someone rewrites the script and doesn't tell you the new lines. I didn't sign up to marry a man who'd humiliate me. Her voice trembled. I didn't sign up to be humiliated either, I replied, only I kept showing up anyway. The silence after that wasn't empty. It was full of everything I'd never said until now. And for the first time I saw Emily reach for a truth she couldn't twist. Carol stood abruptly. Her pearls swayed a flash of white against her navy blouse. This is absurd, she hissed. You're just a boy throwing a tantrum because things didn't go your way. But I didn't rise, didn't flinch, didn't defend. Because something deep inside me had already settled, not in anger but in certainty. Miss Nguyen stood next. Professional but unsure. She glanced at Emily, then back at me. We'll archive the files, she said. If you change your mind, just let us know. I nodded, but I knew I wouldn't be back. Emily still hadn't moved. Still hadn't spoken again. Her hands lay flat on the folder, but they weren't gripping it, just resting. As if part of her wanted to believe this was a dream, a rehearsal, a bluff. But I wasn't bluffing. I rose slowly, buttoned my jacket with quiet hands, and when I turned to leave, I saw her eyes flick toward the door. A twitch. Not a plea. Just a question. Would I look back? I didn't. Because I had looked back too many times before hoping she'd see me standing there. This time, I needed to see who I was without her gaze attached. I passed the assistant. She stepped back, offering a small nod. Like a silent witness. Like someone who understood more than she'd say out loud. The door opened smoothly. Cool hallway air touched my skin, then a sound. A shuffle behind me, fingers brushing fabric. A breath caught mid-throat, but no footsteps followed. I didn't turn. I stepped through the door, the folder still in my hand. No ring box, no bouquet, no regrets. Only the echo of my own voice, and the knowledge that softness without respect isn't kindness. It's surrender. Outside, summer light struck the sidewalk sharp and unbothered. A man walked past with a coffee in hand, his headphones on, the world still spinning. I stood there for a moment, then reached for my car keys. That night, my apartment was half empty, but my mind was full. The kind of full that doesn't let you rest. Not because it's racing, but because something inside has finally gone still. The cardboard boxes loomed like quiet sentries. Some half open, some sealed, waiting for a destination I hadn't chosen yet. Scout lay curled at the base of the couch. His tail thumped once when I walked by, just enough to remind me I wasn't entirely alone. I poured a glass of red wine, the bottle wedged between a roll of duct tape and a stray screw from the curtain rods. The apartment echoed, bare walls bounce sound back faster than you'd think. I didn't turn on the television. Didn't fill the space with noise. Instead, I tapped the screen of my phone, opened FaceTime, and called Phil. His beard filled half the frame before he adjusted it. Yo. You alive? I gave a half smile. Technically. His eyes scanned the frame behind me. Is that a laundry basket acting as a dining chair? It's a phase, I said. He laughed. Not mocking, just that low familiar sound of someone who's known all your past versions. How'd it go? Phil asked. I took a sip of wine. The planner's assistant almost cried. Carol nearly combusted. Emily just froze. Phil nodded, waiting. Then I added, I forfeited a 6-figure venue deposit. He winced. Ouch. But I feel free. The words came without needing to be dug up. No performance. No caveat. Phil raised his glass of something suspiciously neon. To being broke and brave. I clinked my wine glass against the phone. It felt good, the smallest of toasts, but all mine. Scout shifted by my foot, nose nudging the back of my ankle. Warm grounding. You still seeing that vet tech? Phil asked, leaning forward. I shook my head. That was months ago. She wanted someone less transitional. He laughed again. Women and their timing. I looked around the room. A place in progress. Just like me. After we hung up, I didn't move for a while. The wine had gone warm in my glass, but I still sipped it. The air was quiet, not heavy, just honest. I walked over to the counter and pulled open the side drawer. There it sat exactly where I left it. Emily's wedding invitation. Cream cardstock. Gold lettering. The kind that whispers perfection before you even read it. I ran my thumb along the edge. A crease near the middle from when I first opened it, then quickly closed it again. My name still shimmered on the envelope. Handwritten. Curated. Too careful. I held it under the light, gave myself a few seconds, then walked to the recycling bin. It went in quietly. No drama. No slow motion farewell. Just the sound of paper brushing other paper. The sound of something done. I let out a breath. Not a sigh, a reset. Scout's ears perked as I walked past. He always knew when I let go of something. Somehow dogs feel those shifts before even we do. The phone buzzed. A soft vibration on the edge of the sink. I picked it up. Kate. Coffee Friday at Black Rock. My treat. I stared at the message. It wasn't flirty, wasn't full of emojis or subtext. Just an offer. Clear. Direct. Warm. Kate, who'd checked on me after the bridal shower, even when others looked away. Scout sat up beside me, tail sweeping the floor once. Then again. Eyes locked on mine. I glanced at the time. Friday wasn't far. I opened my banking app. The number staring back wasn't pretty. I'd poured more than money into that wedding. I'd poured time, energy, identity, but none of it bought peace. Now I had peace, and a much tighter budget. Still, my thumb hovered. Then moved. See you Friday. I set the phone down and for the first time in weeks didn't second-guess myself. No mental ping-pong match. No rehearsing what-ifs. Just one decision, quiet, simple, mine. Scout pawed at my shin. His eyes followed me as I moved through the apartment as if asking, are we really doing this? Are we starting fresh? I knelt beside him. Ran my hand down his golden fur. His head leaned into my palm. Guess it's just us for now, I said softly. But I think that's enough. His ears twitched. Not in disagreement, just listening. Always listening. I stood again. Walked toward the window, the Pearl District skyline shimmering in late summer haze. From here life looked both smaller and wider. Like I had less but somehow more room to breathe. The boxes would wait. The new couch could wait. Even the silence could wait. But maybe I didn't have to. Not for everything. Scout nudged my leg again, tail brushing lightly against the wall. I turned toward him, smiled just enough. Because sometimes the smallest gestures, a paw, a text, a goodbye card, in the trash mark the biggest turning points. And this time I didn't need permission to feel ready. I walked into Black Rock and saw her, Kate. Rain-damp umbrella leaning beside her chair, a bright smile warming the window seat. She waved with one hand, the other wrapped around a ceramic latte cup etched with vines. The espresso machine hissed from behind the bar, steam rising like breath on a cold morning. It didn't feel loud, it felt alive. The walls wore hand-painted murals, swirls of crimson and navy behind tables of couples writers, the retired man who read the same dog-eared mystery every Thursday. I stepped forward slowly, shaking rain from my jacket sleeve. Kate stood tall enough to meet me eye to eye, but not so tall that I couldn't see the crinkle of concern just behind her lashes. She handed me a to-go cup. Extra foam, she said, but I told them not to go crazy with the syrup. I took it carefully. The lid clicked under my fingers. A delicate leaf floated in the center of the froth, not perfect, but intentional. Thanks, I said. I forgot how much I liked these. We sat. The window beside us streamed soft light through rain trails. Outside puddles reflected the slow bounce of spring. Kate brushed damp hair behind her ear. You look rested, she said. I gave a half laugh. Rested or just emptied out? She shrugged, smiling. Sometimes empty is a good place to build from. The jazz overhead shifted keys. Someone laughed 2 tables over. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, thumbed past a few texts from Phil, then opened a screenshot. "I've been working on this," I said. "It's not much, just a sketch. But it's mine." Kate leaned in. The design was rough, a budgeting app for freelancers, clean lines, big icons, calming colors. Her eyes scanned it twice, then a third time. She nodded slowly. "You kept the white space," she said. "Most people don't trust the silence." I looked at her. And maybe for the first time, I let someone look back without armor. I hadn't realized how loud my old life was until I stepped into hers. Kate didn't rush the conversation. She didn't fill the space. She let it breathe. I set my coffee down. "It's strange," I said. "Everyone used to praise how easy I was to be around. How agreeable. But they never asked what that ease cost me." Kate tilted her head. "Maybe they assumed you didn't mind paying it." I met her eyes. Deep brown, steady. Not searching to fix, just trying to understand. I think I said slowly, "I got so used to smoothing things over that I forgot rough edges mean something." She smiled then, not a soft smile, not a romantic one. A proud one. "I like people with edges," she said. "They catch the light better." I laughed, really laughed. Not a social chuckle, not a polite reflex. It came from somewhere unclenched. A small breeze slipped through the cafe door as someone exited. Scout's leash, coiled under the table, shifted gently with the draft. He was curled at my feet, not needing to understand the words, just listening as always. Kate glanced down. "He's part of the reset, huh, Scout?" I smiled. "He's been through all of it, never left." Even when I didn't know how to stay with myself, she nodded. "I get that." Her hand reached for her purse. She pulled out a slender black card. Tossed it onto the table right beside my phone. "My turn," she said. Then added, "No arguments, okay?" I raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Kate leaned forward, both elbows on the table. "This isn't a debt, it's a beginning. Let me have the honor of it." I stared at the card. At the soft matte finish. At the way it didn't demand anything. Just offered. Like she did. I reached across the table, not for the card, but for her hand. She blinked once, then let her fingers rest in mine. Warm. Still. Intentional. "No more owing," I said. "No more proving. Just choosing." The jazz drifted into a slower tempo. Somewhere behind us a spoon clinked gently against porcelain. Kate's smile softened. "You've changed," she whispered. I nodded. Or maybe I stopped folding myself to fit inside someone else's silence. She squeezed my hand. "Good. Because I like people who take up space." We sat like that, 2 hands, one story, beginning after another, had cleanly ended. Outside the rain had slowed. Inside, Scout shifted under the table, then settled again, his breath calm and steady. For a moment, I thought about everything I had walked away from. The wedding. The guest list. The years of being easy. And then I looked forward. To morning coffees that didn't ask me to shrink. To plans built without pressure. To voices that didn't talk over mine. Kate's eyes met mine, bright, quiet, sure. "What do you want to build next?" she asked. I didn't have a polished answer. Just a knowing. A beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I trusted it. My hand rested over hers, steady now, no longer unsure. We didn't need many words. Somehow the quiet between us said enough. Not all journeys end with fireworks or grand applause. Some just close gently. And open into a life where love doesn't need proving. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop trying to please everyone. If this story reminded you of someone in your life, feel free to share your thoughts below. I'll be reading.